Hey team, Airboss here. I'm on board USS Midway, reflecting on the most critical naval battle in our history. It was near the island of Midway, 78 years ago, that naval aviation helped turn the tide in the Pacific. Carriers and naval aviators were key to delivering a crippling blow against a peer enemy. Outnumbered and outgunned, it was the bravery and selfless sacrifice of our people that carried the day. Today, sailors on board nuclear-powered aircraft carriers and air wings continue to defend freedom around the globe. It remains that no other weapon system can deploy forward with the speed, endurance, and combat power of a carrier strike group. We stand on the shoulders of the giants who preceded us, and we pay homage to their legacy each day by demonstrating honor, courage, and commitment.
Jim Manning was manning the turret gunner. Manning called over the intercom and said, "We're being attacked by Japanese fighter planes." And he started firing the 50 caliber. He made a couple of firing bursts, and then I didn't hear any firing. I looked over my shoulder. I was down on my knees, and I could see the turret had stowed and that Jim was hanging just in the harness. He was obviously dead at that point.
I didn't know I didn't hear my turret gun firing anymore.
And then the next thing that I do remember was hanging down and coming to, and it almost felt like a hole in my head, and there's the bullet hole in the cap where I'd been hit on the head.
Ferry called me up and said he was okay, and I said, "How about Manning?" He said, "He's dead."
We went from Pearl Harbor to Midway, and that's where we had the majority of our action was there. Of course, I was young then, and you don't think about a lot of things. Like I'm 92 now.
We're paying our respects to the brothers and sisters that's gone before us.
I want to thank them so very much for carrying on in a great tradition.
The fighting spirit of the greatest generation lives on in our sailors today.
Morning, Pilgrims. PappyStu here. Hope this finds you well. And here we are observing Memorial Day. And by strange coincidence, in just a few days, we'll have the 69th anniversary of Midway, the turning point, June 4th through June 7th of 1942. And not only is this an appropriate topic for a Memorial Day weekend, but it also bears a good deal of significance for the history of our country, the world, I could argue, and myself in particular. That might seem peculiar considering my grandfather on my mom's side, the original Pappy, was the one who fought in World War II. But when I was a young sailor, at the age of 17, I went aboard the USS Lexington, Lady Lex, the Blue Ghost. I was on her for 9 months, TDY, waiting for nuclear power school to go on to submarines. And she was the 6th ship in the U.S. Navy to bear the name Lexington. The 5th ship to bear the name was CV-2 Lexington, that was sunk in the Coral Sea 4 months after Pearl Harbor. Lady Lex was built in, or commissioned rather, in 1943 and participated in the last couple of years of the Pacific Campaign in World War II. And then she had the longest record of service of any naval ship. While I was aboard her, she was the oldest ship in the Navy, an Essex class carrier, and the oldest one. And then today she's still the oldest aircraft carrier in the world. Unlike all the other subs and ships that I served aboard, which are gone now, either razor blades or reefs at the bottom of the sea somewhere, she's still alive and kicking, though decommissioned. She's a museum ship in Corpus Christi. I think where she ties into Midway is that while I was aboard her, I had the great privilege and honor to participate in filming the motion picture Midway. I got to meet Charlton Heston, Glenn Ford, Henry Fonda, and all those guys, and participated in the filming of the scenes in the movie Midway aboard Lexington. That was a pretty interesting deal for a 17-year-old kid. And John Ford, I believe, directed the movie. I'm not absolutely positive about that, but he did make 2 documentaries of the actual battle at Midway in June of '42. He made a movie about the battle itself and the attack on Midway Island in particular. And he also made a movie about the torpedo squadrons on the 3 U.S. carriers that participated in the battle. Those 3 carriers were the Enterprise, the Hornet, and the Yorktown, and most of their torpedo bombers were lost. It was a real touch-and-go affair. The Americans were grossly outnumbered. Japanese had 4 carriers, the Kaga, the Akai, the Soryu, and Hiryu, all of which had participated in the Pearl Harbor attack 6 months earlier. And it really was touch and go. The Americans got lucky and found the Japanese first, and the first couple waves of attacks were completely shot down. Most of the torpedo bombers lost their lives from all 3 carriers. And then they managed to pull down the zero air cover over the carriers, and the dive bombers came in, and the Japanese paid a heavy price of all 3 of those carriers. At first 3 of the carriers, and then the last one after another attack, which we didn't get away unscathed. We lost the Yorktown, and we lost a lot of really fine men that we should remember here on Memorial Day. And the torpedo bomber squadrons, they went in against all odds and were shot down and lost their lives, except for very few exceptions. Here recently, Mr. Ballard, of fame of Titanic and Bismarck and finding all those sunken ships, did a expedition with some survivors of the Midway campaign, a couple Americans and a couple of Japanese, and they went out to try to find the Japanese carriers and the American carriers. At first they didn't find the Japanese carriers. In a later expedition they found part of the Kaga, but they did find Yorktown, and with a deep submersion ROV, and took video of her, and I got to see that. The Japanese lost a little over 3,000 men. We lost a little over 300 men. And up until that time in World War II, the Americans had lost every single battle, and were reeling from the losses at Pearl Harbor and being so far behind the curve in naval aviation and number of ships, quality of ships, etc. But at Midway, the tide was turned, and it was all downhill for the Emperor and the Empire of Japan from that point on. One of the most striking things about Midway, the legacy of it now on Ballard's expedition, was that both the American and the Japanese veterans were of the same mind and spirit, that It was a very challenging time. I can't speak, pardon me. I just got up. And anyway, they felt, they put to bed their demons. They were against war in general. It was just something they did. Their country called them to do it, the same as our men and women today in the armed services. And they were unified in their send-off to their comrades that were there at the bottom of the sea when they were visiting, and they were very moved and touched and had a hard time speaking about the event. No one more than the soldier and sailor bears the trials of war and the wages and pays the price for war than they. Politicians stardom, and the average man is the one who pays the price. But that's almost 70 years ago now, and a lot of water under the bridge, and here we are on Memorial Day weekend, and I guess the best thing we could do is try to learn the lessons from what world wars have reaped and sowed for us, and then lastly, that we should remember these gentlemen who so willingly gave their lives to defend their country and preserve freedom for each and every one of us. My time on the Lady Lex was rewarding, and the memories of that time will always be something I carry near and dear, so it's a pleasure to share them with you guys. I hope this found you having a most excellent Memorial Day weekend, and that you actually do take the time to observe Memorial Day, to think of those fallen heroes like the torpedo bombers of the 3 carriers and the ill-fated crew of the Yorktown who lies in quiet at the bottom of the Pacific. PappyStu said it, and I'm out and on the side.